Welcome to the Find Your Feminine Fire podcast. I'm your host, renowned sex and relationship coach Amanda Testa. And if you are looking to reclaim your sexual desire, take sex from a to-do to something you look forward to, and enjoy deeply connected relationships without adding more to your already full plate, then you are in the right place. Listen in to discover how to fan the flames of your feminine fire, fall in love with your sensual self again, and experience intimacy like never before, all in a way that feels really good to your system. Make yourself comfortable and enjoy the episode. Hello and welcome to the podcast. Are you ready to manifest your next level life and relationships? If you are looking to find out what it really takes to go beyond your happiness ceiling and experience the joys of life in deeper ways, you are in for a very special treat this episode. Today, I am talking with the incredible Gay Hendrix, and we are going to dive into what it takes to really bring forth your genius in your life and your relationships. And as you might be very familiar with Gay Hendrix, he and his wife, Katie, have been leaders in the fields of relationship transformation for more than 45 years, written more than 40 books, trained thousands of coaches, and done transformative work in this field. And so I feel so honored to have you here today. Thank you so much for being here, Gay.
Great being with you, Amanda. Katie's in the next room over doing another show, and we had a great anniversary recently because we celebrated the 44th anniversary of the day we met back in 1980.
Amazing.
And yeah, totally amazing. And so we've been around the world, the equivalent of something like, I think, 30 times, teaching relationship seminars. And I'm now happily doing most of these conversations from home rather than running around the world doing them now.
Yeah, well, I think that's such a huge celebration, 44 years. And I think that, to be honest, is a big key of being able to live in a genius zone and to live your best life is to have a really beautiful partnership and to celebrate each other. And I think once I read that you wrote, I just love this. It was like just being able to live in the light of Katie's love just is a gift. And I thought, oh, how beautiful. What a beautiful sentiment.
Well, I feel it everywhere I go in the world, living in the light of her love. It's been totally transformational because it's helped me learn to love myself at deeper levels unconditionally, just as she is so good at it. And so she's been my main love coach in my life for the last almost half century now.
That's so beautiful.
Yeah, if you should have seen my relationship disasters in my teens and 20s, you would never suspect a future relationship expert. But fortunately, I woke up and learned some things in my early 30s that qualified me to get into a relationship with Katie and when I was 34. And so that's been a straight miracle ride ever since.
That's interesting. 34. That's when I met my husband now.
Oh.
So is it okay if I share a quick story with you?
Absolutely.
So I know you just have your newest book out, your Big Leap Year, which I'm so excited because I think we're going to dive into this more about just the beautiful power and simple daily things that you can do. But I remember reading, the first time I heard of you was in 2014, and I read The Big Leap, which I think you wrote it came out in 2009 or something like that. But I remember at that point in my life, I was, my daughter was she was about a year and a half old, and I was just so disconnected from myself. I found myself in such a deep funk. And I just remember I woke up in the morning one day and I was in the bathroom and I had zero recollection with the person looking back at me. And so I was starting to follow the breadcrumbs, like, what can I do? And I saw this book club. This group of women was reading The Big Leap, and I dove in, and it was, I got emotional when I was thinking about it this morning because it was like such a huge transformation in my life, like just changing my mindset, realizing where I was holding myself back, and meeting some amazing in that book club too, like some of my dearest friends. So thank you so much. Your work has really touched me deeply.
Thank you. That brings a tear to my eye. That's the best thing you can say to an author, is that the book changed your life, and blessings to those folks in that book club too, that you were able to join, and blessings to all the Big Leap book clubs around the world that study the book. So
Yeah.
That's the sweet essence of life to me, is to hear a direct confirmation that my book made a difference. And I'll be sure to tell Katie about that too.
Yes, thank you so much. And I think, that's why I always recommend this book and I always go back to it during times where it feels hard. And so I feel like that even led me to go start my own coaching business. And I feel like,
Mm.
I think one of the beautiful things, out of so much beautiful work you've done is just how you can take things that feel hard, but you can make them bite size and doable. And I think that is what is the key, right? Because it sometimes can feel really hard to make these big leaps. So I'd love if you could
Yeah.
speak to that a little bit, if you don't mind.
Well, actually, that's why the new book, Your Big Leap Year, came into being, because a whole bunch of people have been asking me to write that book over the past 10 or 15 years since The Big Leap came out. And so this past year, I just put my nose in my computer and finally did it. And also great thanks to Joel Fotinos at the publishers, St. Martin's Essentials. He had a great deal to do with the book being published too. And so, yeah, The Big Leap, if you really look at The Big Leap, it has only two or three really big ideas in it. And one big idea is finding your genius zone. And to me, in life's evolution, that's a yes. You've got to do that if you want a successful life, because at some point you have to start putting your priority on the things that are in your genius zone, the things that you love to do and make your biggest contribution. I was blessed to figure that out when I was in my 30s. But, I've worked with people all the time. They're in their 50s or 60s who are just figuring out what their genius is. And that's great. It has no time limit on it. There's no time stamp, expiration date on genius. So I've had people in here who are 70, 75 years old and still clarifying their genius. So the moment you start making your life about finding out what your genius is, in my experience, your life takes on a magical journey to it. It's no longer about whatever going through life has been. It's about now a quest for something human beings deeply hunger for, which is to do what we most love to do and do what brings us the most satisfaction and also makes the biggest contribution to other people. That to me is a sacred part of genius. I don't want the kind of genius that's some wild and crazy person on the edge of the woods that never comes into town with anything. That's
Yeah.
what I used to think of was genius when I was a kid, some madman or madwoman on the outskirts of town. But to me now, genius is organic. It's just knocking on our door all the time, trying to get us to say yes to it. And the big leap year, your big leap year, and the big leap are both about saying yes to that. The second thing, it's all about overcoming your upper limit problems, because
Yeah.
that gets us sometimes sweaty work there. That's not always bread and roses.
Yeah. And just for those listening who might not be familiar with what the upper limit is, would you just share a little bit about what you mean when you say upper limit?
Something I discovered early in my quest was that I had upper limits built into how much love and positive energy and success I could let myself handle. And so I started looking into that. At the time, I wasn't married to Katie yet, but why do my girlfriend and I get along great for 3 days and then start an argument that sometimes takes us 3 weeks to get over? And why is it that I have a kind of a great leap forward in my work and then two leaps backwards? And so I started calling that an upper limit problem. And I started looking into it with my clients. And at the time I was still at Stanford. I just finished my PhD and I was working there for a year after I went on to the University of Colorado to start my career out there. And so these brilliant Silicon Valley executives would have some great breakthrough at work. Then they'd go home that night and had a knockdown, drag out argument with their spouse or family or whoever, it didn't matter, or they'd go out and get drunk or something that would put a damper on their ability to celebrate that good feeling. And so I started really looking into that. That became a passion of mine. And I ultimately discovered that there's a set of limiting beliefs that causes us to sabotage ourselves over and over again. And do we have time to talk about those a little bit?
Yes, please.
Okay, great. One huge one, and I want everybody to just be honest with yourselves as I'm talking about these. One of the biggest ones is a lot of us feel fundamentally flawed inside, like we don't deserve the good things of life. And a lot of us have the opposite feeling. We deserve unfortunate things happening to us over and over again. So at some point, I believe any person who wants to grow has to start dismantling those old beliefs. And they're not real. That's the first thing I can tell you about them. They were just something your mind glommed onto in response to what you saw around you growing up and what you heard every day and that kind of thing. I had a remarkable experience recently of this very thing we're talking about. It'd be a great example of this. I broke my femur this past year. And so I've been doing a lot of rehabbing of basically learning to
Yeah.
walk on two legs again. And I did a big drama on it. I had a slip and fall out by my swimming pool on a rainy day and just cracked it in a bunch of different places. And so I'm full of bolts and screws and rods and everything. Anyway, that's sort of beside the point in a way. But what's important is through it, I met a whole bunch of different people. I'd never broken a bone before in my life at age 78, and I'd never actually had a cold even in 25 years. And so I wasn't used to being an invalid in any way. So that was a hard one to
Yeah.
start at first. But the other important thing was that I meet people that I wouldn't otherwise have met. And one of them was a remarkable young man who was about to turn 25 when I met him. And he was a rehab person over at the rehab place that I was going to learn how to walk again and all of that. And so he would work with me every day. And I got to know him quite well. And on the surface, he had all these tattoos and things everywhere. And you'd think, oh, wow, this person is a gangbanger or something. And it turned out that I was absolutely right in my prejudiced way of looking at him because he came from a family where he told me that one day he realized he was at a Thanksgiving dinner and he realized that he had just gotten in trouble for the first time at age 15. And he looked around the room and he saw that every other member of his family but his mom had either been in prison, was going to be in prison, was out of prison and on probation, but that was who his people were. And he had to realize, he said, oh, the only reason that happens is we all agree that that's the way we ought to do things. And he had this idea, why don't we reinvent ourselves as people who do good things in the world rather than keep getting caught for stealing cars and things. I mean, when you think about it, it's just a radical thing for a person to
Yes.
do. And blessings to him for that thought, because that led him, picture this at Thanksgiving dinner. He got so turned on by this thought that he made a speech. He said, look, the reason we're all going to prison and everything is because we think of ourselves as criminals and losers and people who have to steal to get things. Why don't we just put our attention on doing positive things in the same amount of energy that it takes to steal stuff would be, we could express it positively in the world. And I don't know if he expected standing ovation from that, but he did not get it. Everybody said, are you out of your effing mind? And so anyway, he kind of got drummed out a little bit. But anyway, he didn't let that stop him. That was what the amazing thing was.
Yeah.
He envisioned a whole new life and went back to junior college and was getting his degree in this physical therapy profession. And he's good at it, man. He was so good at it because he's been to hell and back as far as suffering goes with the members of his family and his own life and the milieu he came out of. And I think, it's such a beautiful thing to me. I've been in the world of human transformation since one magic day in 1968 that changed everything for me. And so, how many years ago is that? That would be about 55 years, would it not? Okay. So, for 55 years, the thing that has just absolutely amazed me about being human is our ability to reinvent ourselves. When I had my first, okay, just to contrast, I'm 6 feet tall. You may not be able to tell that on TV here, but I'm 6 feet tall and I weigh about 180, 85, something like that. I'm an athletic looking person. I work out 3 days a week. And so if I walk by you on the street, you'd say, hey, there's a athletic looking old guy walking by me. And so that's who I am now and have been for the last half century or so. But on my day of awakening, back there in the late 60s, I weighed more than 300 pounds. I puffed on 2 to 3 packs of Marlboros a day. I wore these gigantic glasses. I was in a really toxic relationship and couldn't afford to get out of it because I had something like $39 in the bank and didn't even have enough to rent another apartment. So X, Y, and Z, I had pretty much taken it out to the max as far as what a mess I could create with my life. But fortunately, I had a wake up day and I realized that, like my physical therapy person, that had all been invented in my mind due to childhood conditioning and things I'd inherited and things like that. But I didn't have to do that. I could make up my mind and change my life. And do you know, back in the 19th century, when all sorts of things like the telephone and the telegraph and the locomotive and all that were invented, Henry James, the philosopher at Harvard, said the greatest discovery of my time is that you can change the outer circumstances of your life by changing the attitudes of your mind. Wow. So I didn't discover that till after I'd sort of started to figure this out for myself. But it's amazing that people were thinking about this, you know, way, way, way back there. And so we need to get out from under these upper limit beliefs that keep us trapped. One of them is, I got to stay small because I have a fundamental flaw. I'm the wrong skin color, or I'm the wrong weight, or I'm too ugly, or I'm too inarticulate, or whatever it is I am. And if you think about it, those are all just stuff that's been applied to you since you got here. It doesn't have anything with your intrinsic self. And so our job, your job, everybody else's job is to get busy about inventing the kind of life that you want. Get a sense of it, get a picture of it, put a poster on the wall with all the elements of it. All those things are great because they get you thinking in the right direction. There's a great Leonard Cohen line from one of his songs that says, everybody's walking around with their hands in their pockets thinking about a box of chocolates. Um, and you go through life kind of living in your what you think you want in life, but it's never what you really want in life. You can never have enough of the stuff you don't really want. And until you make that decision in your life that I'm going to make my life about the quest for my full potential and to help other people around me discover their full potential, we're leaving a lot of our capabilities on the table. That activates us. The moment you can begin to think that way and turn your life in that direction, magic is about to happen in your life. And I've had, 50 some years of stuff that I would never have dreamed of in a million years. You don't come up and ask a 300-pound person that has a terrible relationship to write a self-help book.
Yeah.
It would not compute. But later on, I'm sitting on the stage at Oprah talking about, on the Oprah show, talking with Katie about our book, Conscious Loving. And
Yes.
so human beings can transform themselves amazingly. And it doesn't have to take forever either. I changed my life and looked completely different within a year. You
Yeah.
wouldn't recognize me now if you walked past me on the street in 1968 or so.
Right. Well, I think it's interesting too, because we mentioned this before we started recording, but because we were doing this recording on February 29th, which is leap year, which is amazing to think. Like, I when you think about like what's happened the last 4 years and the 4 years before that and the 4 years before that, I mean, there's so much that can change. And I think that also just that opportunity to like, if you want to make some changes, great. You can do it today and be a totally different, have a totally different experience in a year from now, or even imagine 4 years from now. And so, yeah,
And it starts with one positive thought. That's all you have to do is create, here's something I would really like that would be good for my soul. What is that thing? And, the moment you begin to put your attention on it, I think that the universe falls all over itself to reward you because the universe itself, think about it, is an incredible creative place that wants new ideas all the time. Astronomers tell us that there's a place out there in the universe that's spewing out 32 new suns, like our sun, per second. 32 new suns per second being cranked out there in this universal hotspot. Well, that's like our mind. If you sit here for a moment, you'll see that thoughts begin to form out of nowhere. And we're replicating our own little version of the universe here with brand new thoughts. And if we can take some of those thoughts and base them on, what would be good for me? What would really nurture me? And then you begin to open up deeper parts of yourself that you may not have expected existed before. How was I to know as a 300-pounder in a terrible relationship in 1968 that someday my beloved wife that I adored for 44 years would be sitting next to me talking to 10 million people on a TV show? I mean, I would not have been able to compute it. And I say to you, wherever you are today, listening to this or watching this, you may not know the amazing capabilities that you have to await you once you begin to open up and ask questions like, what is my genius zone? What do I most love to do? What makes my biggest contribution in my life? Once you begin to breathe with those kind of ideas, wow, look out, you're about to hatch some amazing miracles in your life.
I love that so much. And I'm wondering too, because you mentioned this, um, that finding the things that are in your zone of genius, kind of letting yourself believe in your ability and your worth, and that just by your innate aliveness that you are worthy of what you want, and you can make a decision to create these new ways of being. I'm curious, you talk about this too in the book, but also many people have, that negative voice that wants to just keep popping back in, right? That's like, oh, well, that's all well and good, but that's not going to happen for you. Or that's great for so-and-so, but that won't be for you. You know what I'm saying? I'm curious if you would speak to that for a moment.
Well, that's a second one of those limiting beliefs. And in the book and in the new book, especially with the activities in your big leap year, I amplify those 4 or 5 limiting beliefs. And the second one is the fear of outshining, what I call the fear of really stepping forward into the light yourself. So many of us hide our abilities by a number 2 persona. We say, okay, there's a whole bunch of number 1 people in the world. They get to have the light shine right on them. I'm not one of those. I need to be a little more in the shadow. Well, let me just say a collective yeah to that, because I've seen so many people step out into the light that didn't believe they had anything. Like I remember when I first came across Oprah, she was working at some little public affairs kind of station in Baltimore, I think it was, back there, Washington or Baltimore, right in there. And this goes way back. And yet she was doing what she does, radiating that same special kind of light that everybody then got to appreciate for 30 years in a national way. She had her eye on the prize, so to speak. She knew what she wanted to create, and it all came true for her times 1,000. That's what I often say to people, that not only can your dreams come true, but they can come true times 10 in a way that you never even imagined they would come through. It wasn't until much later in my life that it suddenly occurred to me that it was a designer project. It was not something where you got handed your life purpose at birth and then you fulfill that. Some people think that way, but beware of that because they're often pushing some other agenda. I always say, unless you've gotten clear on what your life purpose is, you can bet you are fulfilling somebody else's. So let's step out into the light ourselves and say, what do I want to create in my brief wink of the eye time here on this planet?
Hey, it's Amanda. If you are enjoying the show and felt a connection to what we've discussed, and you're ready to take the next step in reigniting your passion and enhancing your relationships, I have something special for you. Visit www.amandatesta.com/thegoods, where you can subscribe to my email. And if you want, you can sign up for a free personalized sensuality discovery session with me. In this one-on-one heart-to-heart session, we'll explore your unique desires, uncover any challenges, and set a path for you to experience the vibrant, fulfilling love life you deserve. Don't let another day pass feeling unfulfilled or disconnection. Take action now, and let's start this beautiful journey together to fire up your feminine fire. Join me at amandatesta.com/thegoods. I'm excited to stay connected. Now back to the show.
I wrote a book once called 5 Wishes, and the book came out of a conversation I had actually with Neil Donald Walsh. Many of people are familiar with his Conversations with God books that have been around the world 110 times, probably. But I found myself once seated at a dinner, a long dinner with Neil, and he and I started amusing ourselves. Neither one of us, by the way, are any good at long dinners. We abhor small talk. And so finally, to amuse ourselves, we started our own version of big talk as this long dinner droned on. And then we started telling each other stories from our life that hadn't made it into any of our books yet. And I told him this story about a man asking me the question about if I were on my deathbed and my life had been a complete success, what were the 5 things that made it a success? And that was such a jolt for me because it made me think positively for a few minutes. Okay, the number one thing, and I'll just tell you what a few of them were. My number one thing that I came out with was that I wanted to create a relationship with a woman with whom I could really grow and change over the years. And I was just in the early stages, but I hadn't made a commitment to Katie yet. I just was in the early stages of my relationship with her. And I was already beginning to see some of the same things come up in me that I know messed my relationships up before. And I did not want that to happen again. So I really made a commitment to getting beyond whatever limiting beliefs I had that would keep me from being in that kind of a relationship. And so that opened up the possibility then of that relationship with Katie. So it had some right then, this goes back 40 some years. So, but it had some right then changes because I came out of that conversation and I said, Katie, I want to make a commitment to you. Woof. And there it's been great from then on. But a lot of relationship problems, as you and your guests that are listening and watching this well know, a lot of relationships problems are because one or the other person haven't really made a full commitment to the relationship. They've still got one foot out the back door or the side door. They've got an escape hatch for themselves. And that escape hatch is maybe 99% commitment. But I can honestly say 99% commitment is exactly the same as no commitment at all. Because in the realm of commitment, you're either on the field or you're on the bench. The moment you step onto the field, you step into a type of commitment Now I'm accountable for my real world consequences. That really is a magic moment in life. And a lot of us, unfortunately, don't get the message about that. I can think of certain people that, even people that run for very high offices, who are absolutely terrible at taking responsibility for anything. They blame, they lie, they weasel out on everything. They get
Mhm.
their lawyers to in the way, anything but just saying, I take full responsibility for that. Oh, wouldn't that be a different world? But anyway,
Yes.
we got to do it one person at a time.
Yeah.
So that number two belief, I got to just really focus on that again, because if you're one of those people that lets other people have the light, I want you to really find out what it feels like to be in the light yourself, because it's a delicious feeling. You don't have to be like Mick Jagger, but he once said, when I'm on stage singing, it's as good as sex, most days.
Yeah.
Some days sex is better, but on most days, being on stage singing is better.
Hmm. Hmm.
And probably Mick Jagger has had his share of sex. I'm just guessing at that.
Right.
But the point I'm making is that we need to all let ourselves shine to our full capabilities. We're not all going to be Oprah. She's got a special way of being. You light up in her presence, and there's not everybody that has that kind of charisma, but you don't need it any either. You know that I, there's an old saying in the literary world that if there's some writer you really admire, don't go out of your way to meet him or her. Go out of your way not to meet him or her, because you're bound to be disappointed. Like, one of my friends trekked to see a very famous woman author that, very famous, and, to find that she was really pickled in alcohol all the time. And it suddenly brought that person down. But we've got to appreciate people for what they do. If you are in that person's family, maybe you got to deal with the fact that they're an alcoholic or whatever. But if you're just a person that appreciates her books, that doesn't have anything to do with it at all. Her artistry is right there on the page. You don't need to dig any deeper than
Hmm.
that. There are famous authors that we read today in our French and English classes that died of syphilis. But, they left this gift of their art. It doesn't matter what kind of dramas they faced in their personal life. So we've all got to look at what lies deep within us. There's a great quotation that I use in one of my books that's from the Gospel of Thomas, one of the apocryphal gospels that did not get included into the final version of the Bible for whatever reason, but it had some very juicy stuff in it. And one of the things Jesus is reported to have said was, if you bring forth what is within you, what is within you will save you. I mean, when you really think about it, that's such a profound bit of wisdom, because how many people do we know that are dying inside because they haven't brought forth the thing that's really going to make their life have joy and meaning? And I'm very sad to say that I witnessed people in my own family, very gifted people, die before they had really released their full potential. And I don't want anybody to do that. I want people to just take the bold step of declaring themselves committed to finding their genius this day and tomorrow, to do it again and to do it again for the next 500 days. I commit to finding out what my genius is and learning how to express it in the world.
I,
Yeah, it's such a simple turn of the mind, but
mhm.
what's the magic that happens after you do it?
Right. And there's something that you talked to with as well that I think is important to note. I love that story about Mick Jagger being on stage, and it's like it's the best thing. It's even better than sex most days, unless it's not. But also how when we are in our genius, it's important to be in that space. And also remembering like it's the little things that we do, the little commitments we make to ourselves, the little things, the little truths that we pay attention to, the way we show up in all aspects of our life that really help us to be in our genius, right? I wonder if you would speak to that just for a moment.
There are things you can do every day that move your genius forward. I talk about certain big moves in the big leap, like making a commitment to your genius, making a commitment to these things. Commitment is one of the most powerful superpower technologies that human beings have access to. But it has to be a certain kind of commitment. It has to be one that integrates your mind, what you really want, with what your heart really wants. In other words, we've got to have heart and mind synchrony to really be a good broadcasting station for our heart's desires. Our minds are very smart, but by themselves, they don't have a lot of power. Our hearts have a lot of power, but when they got combined with the mind smarts, wow, then you become unstoppable. And then if you go even one step further and say, what would further my contact with spirit? What would further my living with a feeling that I'm connected to the universe in every moment? That spiritual feeling that all the mystics talk about. What if I actually experienced that in every moment? You know, back to my 5 wishes book, that first wish, which was to have a relationship with a woman. So I started making that one come true. A second one that I highly recommend was I made a commitment to living in a state of completion, to not having anything that I hadn't said to important people in my life, or anything that I hadn't listened to from important people in my life. And at the time, my mom was still alive. Of course, my brother was alive. I, so, and plus dozens of people that I'd known in my life, I reached out to and just told them things that I had withheld from them. It wasn't always easy, but first I asked them if they wanted the information. And just like I think they tell you to do in the 12-step program, one of the steps, I can't remember which one, has you to, kind of go out to people that you have perhaps offended in the past. But they talk about asking that person's permission first. Say, I've got some stuff on my mind and in my heart I'd like to communicate to you. Would you like it? Don't ever go in and just dump the bucket on a person without asking them first. I've seen people make that mistake. But I really went to great lengths to clean up any of those incompletions I had. And I highly recommend it because it gives you a kind of energy every time you complete one of those things. Like even simple things like I owed $160 to a person that I'd completely forgotten about. I'd lost contact with him. I actually had to do some detective work to find him. But I found him and I paid him back. And forget how he may have felt about it, but just the feeling of liberation that I think our unconscious mind sort of stores away those things and just kind of reminds us maybe in our dreams or something like that. But it wasn't until I went looking for those incompletions that I discovered, oh yeah, I owe $160 to Nelson McLean. So I found him, paid him back. If I remember correctly, I paid him back with some interest too. I hope I did anyway. So some of them are simple like that. Others have positive things. Like I realized there was a person who had changed my life who had died, and I'd never been able to thank that person. His name was J. Wallace Hamilton. And he had given a speech once that I heard, a sermon that changed my life, but I'd never been able to thank him for it. And so I did a little detective work and I found his widow. And I had a very magical experience because I approached her, I wrote her a letter and I said, you have no idea who I am, but your husband and his message changed my life. And I never had a chance to thank him. And I know he's passed on now, but I just want to thank you and through you, thank him for his contribution to my life. Oh my goodness. I got back the most wonderful letter, Amanda. I feel myself feeling a little teary as I just think about it. I got back the letter. She was, I think, 83 years old. And she wrote me back in this kind of spidery script and said she had just been sitting there wondering if her life had had any meaning when suddenly my letter showed up. Ah, you can imagine how I felt because, and then she even asked me if I wanted to have some of his books, and they aren't even on sale. You can't even buy them anymore. So for yeah, I made a little donation, and so I get these books that just they're priceless to me because they reached a place in my heart that I wouldn't have been able to find any other way. So go make your completions, and just reap the harvest of all of that good feeling that's yours.
I think that is it's such a huge thing because you mentioned like those little things you might not be aware of it, but somewhere in your subconscious in the back of your mind, they're like ticking at you, like this needs to be done. And it's taking away your energy from putting it towards what you want. You might not even realize it, I think.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, it's like my accountant has been, they go through every year all the stuff that nobody wants to look at. And so my accountant points out, she says, do you realize you have all of these subscriptions for things that you've had subscriptions for that you've never used, that you've just never gotten around to canceling? And pointed out half a dozen different things that I get dinged like 11.99 for, or 6.99, or like the one they were talking about yesterday was $2.99 a month. But I've been paying this $2.90, forever, and I would probably continue to pay it except some genius bean counter found it. So we've been trying to get unsubscribed from this thing. Anyway, so you get my excitement about this possibility. It's like every one of those you plug, every one of those little things has been plugging a little bit the free flow of your energy. And even if they've only been costing you $2.99 a month, if you do it for 100 months, that's, would put a kid through college. So the thing to do is begin to look for incompletions. What am I not saying to my brother, my sister, my mother, my kids? What am I not saying to my boss? What am I not saying to my best friend? One of the acid tests of a close relationship, you've got a close relationship. If there's nothing that you haven't discussed in the relationship that you're discussing with a third party, like if you're talking to your best bud about some relationship problem that you haven't talked about in the relationship, well, that's a real problem because then you've got a major energy leak. So we all need to get those leaks plugged and get the resulting energy back that we can give ourselves. So those are two of the big ones. Another big, if I may talk about one of the other limiting beliefs, Amanda, is a lot of people feel afraid to move forward or move more in their genius because they believe unconsciously that it would be disloyal to people around them. So in other words, they believe their personal growth would be threatening to their partner, their spouse, or their family of origin. Or so I've worked with people that have that limiting belief that need to realize that your personal growth can be an inspiration to other people, not a threat. And you need to believe in it enough to go ahead and step out and risk disapproval, but to do it in a way that's lovingly toward the people you care about. So, you don't, to do your personal growth, you don't need to pack your bags and run away one day and meditate in 8,000 miles away in Tibet with a guru. What you do maybe need to do is say to your partner, I need to take tomorrow morning off to myself just to go walk in the woods and be with myself for a while. So that may be the best thing you can do that day for your spiritual life, but it's having the willingness to get out there with your needs and celebrate your own needs as well as other people is, in my opinion, a very sacred thing to learn how to do.
I think that's big too, because and that's a big part of like having a beautiful conscious relationship together is like you enjoy time for yourself too, right? It's not always like together's part of it, but also having your own individual space is important, right?
Yeah, because especially in relationships, because from the time we're born, we go through cycles of closeness and individuation, where we're wanting to be close to other people and then only close to ourselves, because life is about developing our ability to be with other people, but also our ability to be with ourselves. And if you look at the developmental psychology work of Margaret Mahler, MD, at Yale, she talks about like even in the first year of life, that babies go through 6 months of closeness and nurturing, and then they go out and start crawling around. They go out into the world, and then they come back to their parent figure, out into the world, back to parent. So, and you even see that. I was watching a great little documentary the other day on elephants, and I was watching these baby elephants run out and explore the edge of the environment, 50 yards away, and then run back to mom, and then run out and explore, then run back to mom. So it's that twin urge for closeness to ourselves and closeness to other people. The twin urges, the urge to merge and the urge to be our own person. So we have to honor both those urges in ourselves. I was just having a memory. I had a couple come in for their first session when I worked in Colorado. I still have a hard time believing it. They had not spent 45 minutes apart from each other in their entire marriage. And they had an 11-year-old, so they'd been married at least 12 or 13 years. So they were so bonded, they did everything together. And I remember, just as an experiment, I had them go out of my office and get on. I walked them out to the sidewalk, and I said, "You walk this way around the block, and you walk this way around the block, just at your regular walking pace, and tell me what happens as you individuate from each other." And they both went through basic anxiety attacks before they got back around the block, because they hadn't unplugged consciously from each other. So some people get really stuck on the union phase and become codependent. Some people get stuck on the don't fence me in individuation phase and don't ever get close enough to another person to find out what life is all about, because they stay closed in. And so, but my basic point is we got to make a commitment to both closeness and our own individuation.
I love this so much. And I am curious too, because I know kind of distilling these things down into simple daily things is a big part of your big leap year. And like really making those daily commitments and doing daily things to what am I going to do to be in my Jonah Jesus today? And how can I, look at this in all areas of my life? Life. But I do think what you said earlier, I just want to really quick speak to this because I know we only have a few more minutes, but when we do the own personal growth, like you mentioned, there's that limiting belief about you might grow away from the person. But I've seen in my experience, and I'm probably sure you have many times, is like when one person makes changes, positive changes, often that inspires people around them to make positive changes, right?
Yes. Well, that's the
Mm-hmm.
way I have seen it work. And gosh, I see miracles like that all the
Yeah.
time, because a lot of people, I always say I have the best inbox in town, because every day people around the world write me about their big leaps. And
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times they talk about how beneficial those have been for members of their family, especially because they're certainly energized in a new way. And it does have a contagious effect. Genius is contagious. That's the way I look at it. And we need to
Yes.
have it be contagious, need to have it be contagious, because, I mean, look around you in the world. We need everybody's genius more than ever right now.
Yes. Yes. Very much so. I'm curious too, like, just to speak to that, I know oftentimes some people can feel like, well, it's so hard, or the world has so many challenges, or, there's really horrible things happening. And I feel selfish focusing on myself. And I'm curious if you might speak to that for 1 minute, because I think that I hear that a lot. And I'm curious your thoughts.
Well, I think that one of the biggest issues we have to face is despair in the world, because a lot of people look around and give up, basically, say, what can I do? Um, that's the reason I think we need to also put a big priority on our quest for genius. because the one thing you can do, the thing you have control over, is how much time you spend every day working on stuff you love to do and what makes your biggest contribution. Start with only 10 minutes, but put that 10 minutes in your book and put you in your calendar every day, because it's that sustained process of opening up to your genius that's going to make the difference. And that's basically why I wrote Your Big Leap Year, is to give people a bite-sized piece of stuff they could do every day that could keep them oriented toward their genius. It's like the old joke says, the guy comes up to a cop in Central Park and says, "How do I get to Carnegie Hall?" And the cop says, "Practice, practice, practice." And that's the way you occupy your genius zone.
Yeah. And then because it does help you think more innovative thoughts come in, more solutions, and just like holding the vision of what is possible, I think is what keeps you going forward. That's what I think too. Yeah.
I agree. Thanks for the good conversation. I appreciate you doing what you do in the world. Living in your zone of genius inspires other people to live in their genius zone. So thanks for spreading the word.
Thank you so much again for being here. And I'll make sure to put in the show notes where everyone can find more about you and your amazing work and all the different offerings that you have in your books. So thank you so much again for being here. It's a pleasure.
Thanks, Amanda. Be well.
Thank you for listening to the Find Your Feminine Fire podcast. If you loved this episode, please go ahead and forward it right now to someone you know would love it. And if you've not had a chance yet to leave us a rave review on Apple Podcasts, please make sure to rate and review if you enjoyed it, as well as make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. If you want to stay connected, make sure to go to amandatesta.com/thegoods to download your free sensuality activation and stay connected. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.